This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 163, I think, from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the Mets have clinched a playoff spot. They beat the Braves in game one in one of the craziest games I think we'll ever see. And it'll probably go down as one of the biggest games, definitely in this franchise's history, to at least get into a postseason spot. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be breaking down everything from, this whole entire series, even game two, because there's some important things out of game two I want to discuss, as well as preview the wild card series as the Mets head back to Milwaukee to take on the Brewers. You can follow Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me on X at AntRivera86 and subscribe to the Subway to Shea podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I don't know what's happening right now, but apparently I am not verified again at the moment on YouTube. I mean on Twitter. So it's not playing on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. So we are just a YouTube vehicle right now. I have to figure out what's going on there and get that set up and get that all fixed up. But I have a guest today, a good friend coming back to the show, my friend Mike Silva from the Talkin Mets podcast. That's Talkin Mets with no G. Mike, it's great to have you on again. And I wanted to do this, especially after the Mets won, because you and me plan to do more spaces during the postseason after every game of this wild card series, whether it's 2 or 3 games. We will be doing spaces like we did last week. Well, we did 2 because the Braves series got rained out, but very excited to be back here with you again.
So you're up for the space? I mean, it's a quick turnaround. It'll be like this time tomorrow night. Mets could be facing elimination again after game 1. Who knows in Milwaukee?
There is so much adrenaline going on right now on this show. And, just after I could barely sleep last night to get ready for this.
I know. First of all, I shaved for you. I had a whole beard going. I threw out my back. See, it was a tough weekend for the Mets, for me. I have all this nervous energy on Saturday morning. What an awful loss on Friday. But, hey, Mets are still a game up. And I decided I'm going to clean the oven because the oven hasn't been cleaned. We don't cook a lot, my wife and I. So I go on I'm bending over and I throw out my back. I mean, I'm talking about spasm on the floor. I was miserable on Saturday, but just like the Mets, I grind through it. I was able to survive Sunday. And then obviously in travel today, watching a game off the phone. And I just had a chance to catch a lot of it on the MLB app on my TV. And look, and I had a friend who works for MLB that was down in Atlanta. He said this morning, look, they want to knock the Mets out. He's told me time and time again. He does a lot of work for MLB in Atlanta, and he says they hate the New York down there. That's the team of the South. So, it wasn't the same Tuesday night crowd that's out for blood, but they were there. But I look at it this way, there's 3 components to today. There is where this season fits in terms of Mets history and how important I think it is. There's a redemption story that's still to be written, but you had one player who don't think if the Mets had been knocked out today, Edwin Diaz could overcome this. I really don't. And then you have truly a guy that is the MVP. And I understand it's Ohtani and Ohtani's stats. I get that. There's some shallowness to some of those stats. You could compile stats like a fantasy baseball player, and no doubt he's a great player. But after the performance today and yesterday and how he came back, and just when I talk about coming back, playing shortstop and being Lindor normal, not DH, not the ginger Lindor on Friday, really coming back, I don't see how you cannot take his MVP candidacy seriously. A week after I said it's done, because he had to sit out all those games. And, I didn't expect much out of him. Frankly, I didn't think we'd see him until the postseason, if that, because it didn't sound good. And you have those 3 components, and that's what makes for a very special day. My friend also said, how he was in the press box after the first game. He thinks this is one of the biggest home runs in Mets history. That's how he rose saying that. It sounded like even a Gary Cohen and guys who have been around this club for so long talk about how special this game is. The day after the season, doubleheader makeup. It's amazing. I don't have I haven't marinated on that, and maybe when the season's over, I'll have more to say. But by far, this was a fun day, even though it ended with the Mets losing game 2 and potentially falling into a better matchup, but that's to be determined.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the matchup as well with the Brewers. Shout out to everyone who is in the chat right now. Got a lot of the regulars in here. Duran Rivera, Maureen, Jeff Cohen, Carlos Ortiz. Appreciate you. As well as Cindy McGrath. Welcome to the show. My friend Johnny Boy. Glad to have you on. Ibby from Till Mets Do His Part as well. And thank you for saying this, Ibby, in the chat. So when you change your name, so adding that X to the front removes the chat. I did not know that. So now I know, and hopefully I will get my Twitter account. If you guys could do me a favor, though, if you can tweet out the link and share that to get more people in this video right now.
People.
Get as many people as you can in to watch this right now, because it's kind of hard to, multitask like this and pay attention to the chat. But if you could get more people in the room, I would totally appreciate this very much. Very excited to get into this show today. And I wanted to start off with a couple of comments here. Duran Rivera saying, hey, Ant, remember when I mentioned that all former Yankees who went on to manage Mets, Berra, Randolph, Showalter, and now Mendoza, all have taken the Mets to the playoffs. Now, let's start off with Carlos Mendoza, right? Because, all roads start with obviously David Stearns into Carlos Mendoza, kind of leading this team here. I know there was a lot of fans that were, not happy to have another Yankee to come join the Mets. And this is one where I said, I don't mind this. I mean, you're coming from a team that has a pedigree of winning. And the fact that he, sat there with Aaron Boone, who, he may not be the best manager in baseball, but he takes his team to the playoffs mostly every year. I want something like that. I want to be in the postseason every year. I want that opportunity. So seeing what Carlos Mendoza did this year with this New York Mets team, obviously there was some pitfalls for him and learning on the job and how to manage a bullpen and, everything that, goes on with becoming a manager and being a manager. I think for his first year and making the playoffs, I think he did a really good job.
I always use it's election season, so everyone has their keys to the White House, right? I have my keys to a manager. I mean, I don't think it's as illustrious as some of these pundits that are opining on the presidential race, but it's managing your boss now. That's one of them. And I think Stearns, it sounds like Stearns loves him. And he wouldn't pick somebody who he didn't get along with. It was his first hire. It's managing the media. And I think he did a great job with that. He never seemed to BS them. He was direct. He was honest. He didn't give anything away. But unlike Buck, I think it wasn't like Buck was deflectionary with entertainment to get away from tough questions. I think Mendoza just talked baseball. It was like, hey, he was direct and honest. And I think that worked with him. You, of course, have to earn the respect and manage that clubhouse. I was concerned about that because Buck was a popular manager. Clearly, there's some similarities. I think Lindor was talking about how it's maybe a little bit different, but similar to styles, very much not too high, not too low. But I guess personality is a little bit different. And then managing a bullpen, and we could debate that, things he did. This was not an easy bullpen to manage. It evolved. It looked strong early on, and then you lost Drew Smith, and you lost Brooks Raley, and Diaz went off the rails, and Reed Garrett went off the rails after a strong start. So you had bullpen, original bullpen, you had influx bullpen, you had what the bullpen turned out to be. And I think he did a fairly good job, and I think today is a perfect example. Here he is. How many managers in 2024 walk out to the mound to talk to their pitcher? Not the pitching coach, the manager, because usually when the manager goes out, he's yanking the guy. And that didn't happen. He was, whatever he was talking about, whether it was in the ninth inning, hey, the runner, or basically saying, hey, man, this is your chance to read. You asked for this. It turns out he asked for this. He wanted to come back in. Stanek was ready. And whether or not that was the pep talk Diaz needed to get the job done, we'll see. But he's always seemed to make the right move. And I think part of this, I really believe the importance of making the postseason, and I've talked about it, and I talked about it yesterday on the show. It's the pseudo innocent climb of this group, of this organization coming together under Cohen, under Mendoza, under Stearns, and starting to move away from, let's face it, maybe 2 decades of chaos, starts and stops and good times and bad times. I mean, you go back to when the Wilpons took over from Doubleday in 2002, and there's books out about some of those eras, but it's all these different eras, and it's highs and lows and a lot of drama and a lot of disappointment in between. And I think that this organization has been chasing 86 for a long time, maybe by retiring Doc and Darryl's numbers. And if you want to talk about Grimace and OMG, everyone forgets about the great speech Darryl had on his retirement ceremony in June that said, hey, embrace this. And they have embraced New York during a time when didn't look like they were. And you got to give Mendoza credit because he kept this all together. He was the guy in the clubhouse. And unlike a modern manager, I don't feel he's just a puppet. I don't feel like there's a lineup from the front office spit to him. And that's it. I really feel he has input. Now, I think that there's things that coming down from the front office that he's going to salute the stripes on, but I think they're taking his input seriously. And, sometimes there's things like taking Christian Scott out at 75 pitches that probably he had no say in on that. But for the most part, I feel like this is his team. And for so many years, I always wanted the next Davey Johnson, the next Bobby V. But Bobby V was a little bit different kind of personality. I mean, he was fired about 6 times during his tenure. But maybe like what the Twins had with Ron Gardenhire or Tom Kelly, where you had someone that you could count on year in and year out that became part of the fabric of the team. Maybe the Mets found their guy. But this is truly what I call the innocent climb of this organization. And I think a big burden. I don't want to use the word house money in Milwaukee, but it's hard to see them win the next series. Who knows? But they had to do this. They had to start somewhere. And I think that this is a great starting point for an organization and a town, quite honestly, that for the first time in a long time, the town has a lot of sports energy. The Knicks, the football teams, even the Giants are not maybe as terrible as we thought.
New York Liberty, WNBA, too.
WNBA, which is becoming more popular. Thank you, Caitlin Clark. The hockey team, the Rangers, the Islanders aren't bad. Like, there's a lot. Sorry, I know you're a Devils fan. I don't really call them New York there, Anthony. I apologize.
That's fine.
The baseball situation, there's a lot of good stuff going on. And it really is harking back for me to the late 90s as a young, early 20s guy that there was so much sports energy here. And for 2 decades, it's been so negative a lot of the times and getting more negative and tougher. And the Mets have been at the center of a lot of that. And I feel today they kind of they push through. And let me tell you, the yoke that I call the burden of history, it fought hard today, man. It's fought hard in September. The Mets went 17-9 in September, and they barely made the postseason. Think about that. I would have said, if you told me they were going to win 89 games at the beginning of the season, I'm like, they got a wild card sewn up. And
with
most
3
years,
wild cards.
With 3 wild cards. I mean, Anthony, you go to history and do this little exercise when you have some time. Just look at the last 15 years and what does 89 wins get you? What Arizona had 88 wins. How many 88-win teams under the current wild card iteration would not make it going back to 2002? Not many, including some of those collapsed Mets teams that did not make the postseason. So crazy how it all turns out.
I put out the link for everyone just in case to remember to share this video, join the live, join the conversation with me and Mike for the next, 45 to 50 minutes here as we, kind of celebrate this Mets team. Just to wrap up on Mendoza real quick, you talked about, pushing all the right buttons. 3 that obviously come to mind was the Quintana game earlier on in the season where he let him go that, extra batter. Just to see his reaction, obviously letting Sevy complete that game sometime, I think it was in August. And then obviously, you look at today, which is going to be a huge one with leaving in Edwin Diaz. Now let's get into this 2-game set, this double header for the New York Mets as they clinch the postseason in game 1. For what was 7 innings of shutout ball from Spencer Schwellenbach. I mean, again,
Mike Scott.
My God,
Holy,
could not touch the guy.
Couldn't touch him.
I think they got maybe 2 singles, 1 infield, like nothing went out
And
of
Anthony,
the
he
infield.
hasn't. I was listening to the broadcast. He hasn't pitched a hell of a lot in his career. I mean, this is a
No.
guy that didn't pitch a lot in amateur baseball. Very little professional baseball experience. I mean, maybe the Braves. I mean, again, geez. I mean, the pitching they've come up with between converting Lopez out of the bullpen to getting whatever's left. I think Sale might be breaking down again. What did I say to you guys? I think we talked about it on the space last week. Sale is not a guy that I guarantee will be healthy. I mean, there was a reason why the Red Sox finally moved away from him. He doesn't stay healthy. He doesn't stay healthy. But they got all this bullpen. And look, even though they weren't facing, I mean, they got Jimenez and Iglesias, which, I mean, Iglesias, here I am criticizing Diaz. Iglesias had a Diaz type of season, and here he blows a big game. And then even the guys like Johnson, I mean, these are good arms coming out of the Braves bullpen, up and down. Just look at the numbers. Much better than what the Mets offer on a given night.
Who is the setup man? He pitched in both games too. Jimenez.
Yeah, and he's always had good stuff. He's always, even going back to his days with Detroit. So, this was a big win. I think, and it was funny as I was tweeting it about, I don't know if Diaz could come back from this. Because I really, at this point, I was like, the Albies, and everybody talks about him being pissed. I think he might have been pissed at Alvarez pitch selection there. I don't have what the pitch was that he pitched to Albies, but look at them in the dugout after. If you go back to watch the game, there was some chirping back and forth. And I wonder if it was over that. Nobody's going to know. But you're getting paid $20 million a year. You're considered, next to Josh Hader, maybe the best closer in the game. I'm not saying you have to be Mariano, because that's the gold standard. That's Babe Ruth of closers. So, okay, that's not fair. But you can't blow that game if I'm paying you $20 million a year. I'm sorry. Now, maybe learning about Diaz as we get deeper into this, bringing him in a non-clean inning, maybe not a good idea. And I know he got distracted because he didn't cover first. Maybe that's something they need to look out for, Pete and Alvarez. Hey, by the way, cover first. Like, these are things that closers are very focused on getting the job done. But I said something, and I tweeted it. And the minute I tweet it, Lindor hits the home run. And then I'll say one thing about Diaz. This guy is a glutton for punishment. He didn't run. He's like, I'll go back out there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure Armando Benitez would have done that, because that's where this was going. Like, Benitez had great stuff back in that time frame, but he didn't hold himself accountable. Guess who used to talk to the media after blowing saves? Johnny Franco, who was not the closer anymore at that point. Benitez wasn't one that liked to talk to the media. He talks to the media. Sometimes I feel like it's Groundhog Day. Well, I didn't do this. We'll do it. Execute your pitches. But he takes accountability, and he wanted the ball. He wanted to go back out there, and he got the job done. And it wasn't the heart of the lineup. He got Olsen out. But these are hitters that could, Travis d'Arnaud's a guy that just, ever since he left the Mets, has discovered how to hit. Well, he was always a decent hitter with the Mets. I think sometimes he was a little underrated. But anyway,
I think he was injured for most of the process.
He was injured. It was
injured.
Truly redemption. Now, I'm not going back on my stance. I don't think this is realistic. Whether the Mets win a championship and Diaz blows through it, I got to tell you, there's a point in time where if you get a decent offer for Diaz, you got to start to think, is this for him, this place, the pressure? Because he got bailed out today. But do you feel confident in the next couple of days in Milwaukee with a 1-run lead in the ninth inning that he could get the job done? I don't. And that's a problem when you're getting paid $20 million a year. I should feel like the bad days are the exception. They're not at any moment they could happen. And unfortunately, I'm not sure. But I mean, and I talked to someone this earlier. They look, it's a big contract. And I know I'm a Debbie Downer here, but this is a real issue. Like, Diaz is a real issue. Yeah, he rebounded, but there might not be a rebound the next time, because the other team might actually get 3 outs and the Mets go home, which could have easily happened today if not for Lindor. So I hate to be the wet blanket here, but this Diaz he has a lot to prove. As the Mets go, so do Diaz, Anthony. He is the reason why they're not competing with the Phillies for a division. They could have won a division this year. That's no joke. Look at 89 wins versus 95. Look at what Diaz's blown games were. Half of them puts them like 3 games back.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me I could cherry pick 3 or 4 Diaz meltdowns, and that's not even half of them from this season. So
Yeah, Diaz is a guy that needs to pitch consistently, as we've seen. He needs to get himself in some type of rhythm on a daily, bi-daily basis. As Carlos Ortiz saying, he doesn't even think he'll pitch tomorrow. I don't think he'll pitch tomorrow. I think if the Mets are doing this, it's not going to be, with Diaz coming out of the bullpen, at least for tomorrow. I don't know at this point in time if he is a guy that I can trade, because you look around the league at other closers, you look at across town, Clay Holmes. That's not, he's not doing a good job out there for the team in the
maybe
Bronx.
I'm being hard here. Maybe I'm being hard on him because Iglesias blew a save. And Craig Kimbrell, you want to talk about winning the Sox winning the championship with kerosene on a fire. They had to go to Sal in some save situations there. How much he imploded. I just look, he's not going anywhere. I think he's here, but as the Mets go for the rest of his tenure, they're all tied together.
Yeah,
because he's the guy, and I gotta be. Lindor saved this guy another day. I don't know how he would have came back next year with this fan base, because they would have been, the minute he got into trouble, you would have that negative air in the ballpark. And I think the fans have had it. The guy's got great stuff. And it's not because of lack of effort. It's almost like he's got complicated mechanics. The moment gets him caught up in the emotion. And outside of 2022, but let's also remember something, Anthony. In 2022, they had a big lead. And when they lost that lead, which was chipped away, it wasn't him that really, he didn't really even get into games against Atlanta. It was the starting pitching that got beat. So we didn't get to see this 2 years ago. He gets hurt last year. And now maybe part of this is just the knee and the rustiness and things like that. And I know he hadn't pitched for a week. So I think that's something the Mets have to start thinking about is, can you get him into games? Part of that is the state of the bullpen. You don't have an effective backup anymore.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's
that
part of it.
I think the problem with today is that for the third straight day in a row, they went to Phil Maton, who had already pitched a lot of it. I was concerned with him coming back again, knowing that we may need him on Tuesday, that they had went to him when I think there could have been another option to go to or not. But look, Diaz came in. He had that tough eighth inning where he gave up the runs and gave up the lead, came back out, asked to come back out. Like you said, how many pitchers do that? And got the job done, got what needed to be done. And I think that's something for him to build off of. He builds off of momentum. And I think Jerry Blevins even said it on the postseason, on the post game, that Edwin Diaz thrives too as well, angry. When he knows he's
an emotional guy.
Yeah, he's an emotional guy.
You look at his body language, you look at his DNA of who he is. The environment is big, and he could be up and down based on his emotions. And I will give him a ton of credit, because he did this in Pittsburgh earlier in the year when they blew the save in the eighth inning. He wants the ball. He wants the ball. And I got to give a guy credit. Going back out there, there are a lot of closers that would have said, I'm done. I blew the game. I'm tired. Save me for the next game. I'll come out next game. I'll get him when it's 4-5-0, like the night before. No, and he did get d'Arnaud out, and they pitched him to sliders, and they got the ground ball and give him a ton of credit. So it's a redemption story. I think it's something to really look out for. I don't want it to be negative today, but I've said this: the Mets are gonna go as far as Diaz. They are so tied, the two. Ever since he's come into this organization, he blew 2019. He had crushing defeats down the stretch in 2021. There was a game on Labor Day, if you guys remember, against the Nats that he blew up. The Mets were starting to recover some momentum, even though they finished under 500, but they weren't at that point. And then 2022, the epic season, and now this year, you're talking about 6 to 8 brutal losses. But similar to Arizona, the next day he came out, wanted the ball, and he got the save, and that's why they're in the postseason. That game, not too long ago, Anthony, I think we might have talked right after that. That game is why they may be in a lot of ways, more so than even this, because they didn't have to win 2 games today to make the postseason.
Jeff Cohen says Diaz needs to start an inning, can't bring him in during an inning with runners on, no confidence. But, with the game on the line, sometimes you have to make this guy uncomfortable. You have to be uncomfortable in certain positions. Carlos Ramos, there's a good point by Carlos Ramos here. I want to get your thoughts on it. He's not making excuses for Diaz, but he shouldn't have been used yesterday in that game against the Brewers. Now, I was opposite. On that thought.
I understand that. I understand that, Carlos, and it's a fair point. However, I don't like a Diaz that has gone more than a week without any work, because then that's a Diaz that's rusty. And if his mechanics are whacked like they could be, he ain't getting anybody out. You're gonna have to pull him, because you'll see. When his mechanics are off. Lefties, it rides away. Once you start seeing the ball ride away from lefties, you start to get concerned. And he used to be dominant against lefties, not this year. And I think that's a mechanical issue. I don't know if that's the knee. But then within the inning, he'll recalibrate. He'll get it back, almost like a wind-up toy. And then he'll lose it against the lefty, and then he gets it back. Watch him one day. Just go back, watch him. This is not hard. You don't have to be pitching coach. Watch the mechanics. They're complicated, and watch him go in and out. That's why Alvarez sometimes is his whisper. Alvarez kind of recalibrates himself a little bit and keeps him honest. And some of that is the energy part of it. I think that gets him going, because then he could start to doubt himself. And he has to pitch with solid mechanics and with conviction. If he doesn't pitch with conviction, that's when he gets himself into trouble. But that's a fair point, but I think it would have been worse. I think you would have went in with a rusty Diaz if he didn't pitch yesterday. I think that's what Mendoza was thinking about when he put him in the game yesterday.
Were you a little shocked that they took Schwellenbach out? I was. I know he hasn't gone more than 8 innings or more.
What's made me? Really
shocked a little bit.
In 1987, 88, he probably doesn't come out. They were nearing close to 100 pitches. I think Taylor really did a number on him in that 11 pitch at bat. And when you have that bullpen, there's really, what are you afraid of? Jimenez has been great. Iglesias has been great. So I can't argue with that. But he was dominant. But I think Taylor took him out of the game. As I watched Joey Lucchesi pitch into the 6th, throwing 110 pitches in the I don't care about your arm second game, I'll say. And think about it. Veterans get treated like this all the time. They'll baby Christian Scott, but they don't care about you. Joey Lucchesi has no future here. Who cares about it? It's only his livelihood. Who cares? But he went out there and he pitched 110 pitches, and he's still alive. And I think that's where this game needs to get to. I think sometimes we get caught up in the batting average against, and this pitch, that pitch, pitches 25 through 50. Look, pitches 25 through 50 are the worst pitches for Schwellenbach. I probably said the guy's name wrong 52 times, but that doesn't mean today they were. You have to watch what your eyes are showing you over there. So, I wasn't totally surprised, because that's the blueprint, but you can start pushing pitchers to 110 pitches. And I think this league is going to have to figure out how to do it. There's just not enough bullpen. Contenders are not going to be able to build enough bullpen. And as to your point, if you could push starters a little bit longer, then you don't need to worry about Phil Maton pitching 3 days in a row, because he's not going to have to.
Once they took him out, obviously after that Tyrone Taylor double, I think it was then Francisco Alvarez who followed it up with a double of his own to get the Mets on the board. Then it went to 3-2 after Lindor had a big hit. Can't forget about that big hit to get the Mets to within a run. And then they tied it up, with, Jose Iglesias's hit down the line, sacrifice fly from Mark Vientos to give the Mets the lead. And then Brandon Nimmo hit an absolute bomb. And I thought that was going to be the backbreaker.
I thought that was going to be the capper.
I mean, you could tell the entire dugout, even Brandon Nimmo, not, walking it off as if, like, we got this.
But that's the thing about the yoke, man, about the, slaying the demon. It's not just going to say, you know what, that's it. I've been around since 1987. I'm done. I'm not. No, they're going to push, and they're going to push, and they're going to push. They're going to push you to the very brink. I mean, Steve Cohen, I just saw something that said that brought tears to his eyes when Nimmo hit the home run. They wanted this. They wanted this a lot. And I think that goes to my third point. Well, my third key here, it's the shortstop playing an MVP. And I'm sorry, there's a Silver Slugger Award, best offensive player. An MVP is not the best offensive player. I know that it's been voted that way. I know guys like Cal Ripken, who played for second division clubs, won the MVP. I know in his prime, Barry Bonds in San Francisco, steroid Bonds, the Giants didn't have to win for him to be the MVP. And I guess you could argue most valuable player is the best all-around player. But I still think, and he won't win it. I don't think he will win it. But I think Lindor today, because they haven't done the votes yet, if I'm not mistaken, today, and I don't think the postseason will count. I don't think they'll do it. I don't know if they're going to, because if he comes up big in the postseason and the vote is not happen, then it'll even be more credence maybe to have recency bias with the voters. But that's what an MVP does. I don't think he was up there trying to hit a home run. I think he was just trying to put a good at bat together. And sure enough, there you go. And you could see the team since he's been back to playing shortstop. And Acuna did a great job subbing in on the homestand. But since he's been back to playing shortstop, they're back to kind of being how they were all year. And the last two games that are the 2024 Mets. Good starting pitching, good bridge to Diaz, and then Diaz getting the big outs. This was a little bit different the way he got the big outs, but he wound up getting the big outs in the end, even though he needed a little bit of help.
The big takeaway for me with Francisco Lindor was on Sunday. He was, able to steal a couple of bases and not feel as much in pain. Running around, sliding. I think that was a big thing for him. And then Monday, it was like, yeah, he's fully back now. And the fact that he hit that, big game-winning home run when, I'm pretty sure 98% thought that the game was over and the Braves were going to clinch right there. The fact that he turned the tide again, I think that was huge for not only the Mets, not for only for the fan base, but just like this entire organization.
Right.
We talked about it. I said it last week that it had to end in Atlanta.
And it had to, and they had to go through this. And that doesn't mean they're always going to beat the Braves in a big spot. That doesn't mean the Braves aren't going to rip their hearts out and come back and beat them in the ninth inning. That could happen. I think this organization now and the innocent climb, I mean, just Google it. I mean, I know it's a Rileyism, but it's about fostering trust and building. And I think a lot of this is the organization starting to foster trust in itself, that this is a place that is serious about putting a functional product out there. And I think it's the fans. The fans just don't trust this team. I think it really turned for the Mets and this anvil of 86 after 2006. I really believe that, because I was there in 2006. It was the summer of love. There was no negative energy.
No.
I don't care how many runs the Mets were down. You expected them to come back. And when that season ended poorly with Game 7, with how Beltran struck out, even though it was nothing anybody could do, it was an elite curveball, it's never been the same. It's never been the same. And we're going on close to 20 years. So, yeah, you've been chasing 86, but I think 06 was that demarcation line where this turned to the dark side. And they really, as a fan base, as an organization, it needs to turn back. There was disappointments in 99 and 2000, but I don't remember anger like every time the Mets don't make a big outing or don't have a big outing. I mean, the stress and the anger, I mean, it's like a day in and day out. Well, the season's over. Like, it wasn't like that. After 06, it's been like that. And it sucks. And I think hopefully this is a small piece in going forward. Now, if they advance and they make a deep run, even better. But even if they lose the next two games and they're never to be heard from again, and there will be changes because you're going to need to tweak this team. It's not a perfect team. I think they've set a really good foundation, because you got some more young players on the offensive side coming up, maybe some pitching. Maybe you have, guys that'll be back. Maybe you get Iglesias back, Winker, who knows? We'll see what Alonso, but you have something, I think, that's starting to look good, similar to what the Knicks have put together and the Rangers have put together. Like, it's starting to look good. It's starting to feel good. And that's not just fan talk. That's you get that, that vibe. And I've seen that vibe. And I've seen that vibe now with the Knicks, with the Rangers, now with the Mets, and maybe you have it with your football teams and and certainly the Yankees have a great shot at winning the World Series.
Yeah, the foundation has been set now, right? You got, Cohen being the owner, like the pecking order now is being put in place. Cohen on top, president of baseball operations, David Stearns. I don't know if they'll ever get a general manager or do any of that. That doesn't seem like they're in a rush or a hurry to do that. But Carlos Mendoza at manager, and everything is falling into place with the roster the way it is. Game one, a big win for the Mets that helped them clinch. They didn't get to celebrate because they had to play game two. And game two is important. And I say that because, if the Mets did not clinch, we were going to see, Luis Severino try to salvage this season for the Mets. So the fact that they were able to win, not have to go to Sevy, save Sevy for game one on full rest, to then save Sean Manaea, who would have went game one. If not, he's going to be on full rest for Milwaukee as well.
He'll pitch game two. And look, I looked at Milwaukee. No Christian Yelich. He's been out. They're not a great offensive team. They have really good bullpen. Trevor McGill, part of that. Tyler's brother. I'm not scared of Freddie Peralta. They don't scare me. I know they've beaten the Mets 5 out of 6, but they're another one of these teams similar to the Mets. You look at the back or the front of the baseball reference page, the back of the baseball card. You're like, they're nothing special. I even heard Steve Phillips talking about this on MLB Network Radio this morning. But they win. They do things to win, and that's what baseball is all about. It's not about fantasy baseball. If it was about fantasy baseball, you wouldn't have to play the games at this point. So you go there. But I will say one thing about not having a GM. I mean, keep an eye on Edward Brizuela, who's one of Stearns' right-hand mans. I think he came from Milwaukee. He might be somebody that at some point. The fact that they haven't gone outside the organization, he may have his eyes on. And Jeremy Hefner as well. I know these are not topics for today, but that's another name that has come up that potentially at some point might be in the running for, being a general manager of the Mets. Anyway, it's sidebar note, just from what you said.
Yeah, we'll see how that happens in the offseason for the Mets. But like going back to that game too with, Joey Lucchesi pitching, he gave him a solid outing, I thought. Giving him, good, even saving the bullpen. I thought was big for him, especially with Edwin Diaz pitching the 2 innings and not having Maton. They went to Brazoban and they went to Adam Ottavino, and it is what it is. I thought that there was an opportunity as this game stayed 1-0. I was like, oh, is there an opportunity for us to actually knock out the Braves here? But I felt like the offense was really not into the game either. They were taking a lot of strikes, a lot of fastballs down the plate.
It's a burnout. I mean, once you win a game like you did, you're just burnt out. And look, the Braves didn't exactly play well either.
No, they didn't. And that's why I thought that we still had an opportunity to quite possibly, knock them out of the playoffs. Because I thought that even that would have been obviously icing on the cake, but that would have taken this whole day to another level for the Mets to knock Atlanta out in Atlanta to celebrate on the field. But it didn't happen. Mets still get in. Arizona's on the outside looking in because they could not win the tiebreak against the Mets. So that cost them there.
Sure. And Iglesias extended his hitting streak to 22 games now. So
22-game hitting streak.
If he comes back to the Mets, he has a chance if he can get a hit in his first 8 games next year to tie Moises Salou's record. In that September of 2007, he was huge that September. I mean, offense wasn't that team's problem. It was their bullpen and their pitching. But again, another story for another day. But I think, this is just, like I said, game one is where it's all about. This was huge for this organization. You could tell with the way Cohen has talked about it, the way that they celebrated. I mean, they were raucous in that clubhouse. And I know it's just a wild card. All you earned was 2 more days. Like, in 48 hours, this could be over.
Yeah.
But you could see how important this was for this organization, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now let's turn the corner and talk about the wild card and the Mets heading back to Milwaukee to face the Brewers, who have given them fits all season. I think the Mets were 1-5 against the Brewers this season, and they lost the first 5 games of the series. And that the game that they won, I feel like the Brewers were the Mets in game 2. I mean, they really weren't.
How do you think
anything.
the Brewers are feeling with the karma of I mean, the law of averages says the Mets are going to win a couple of games. They're not. The gap isn't that wide between these two teams. As a matter of fact, between Arizona, first team out, and Philly, top seed, Dodgers, Philly, let's say top teams, I don't think there's a big gap between those teams. Maybe that's an anomaly for 2024, but I think it's a very even race. I mean, what, 7-win difference? That's 1 win a month, Anthony. You're going to tell me not one of these teams could have said, I could have got a win in April and another win in May, another win in June. Like every month you could point at one game that you should have won that game. And that's really, it's so close. That's why I don't mind the extra postseason spots, because I think for so many years, yeah, I get it, the purity of 162. It's statistically negligible when between 88 and 92. And if you get 92 wins, yeah, you get the next level of teams, but you'd be surprised. It's very, 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 very minimal difference between a lot of these teams. Sometimes it's scheduled now because you're playing, everybody once. It's not like the teams that play in divisions with Chicago. I mean, they get a couple of easy wins. Like there's so many things you could put together and say about that.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I have a good feeling about this series, and I'm not just saying that to be a Mets fan, but Luis Severino is going to be looking for a bounce back outing after that really tough one against Atlanta last week. He's going to be on, he's got a good rest here from not pitching because he was supposed to pitch on Sunday and then moved up to today. And then you got Minaya going in game 2, who would have been on 3 days rest, will now have his full rest. And he's looking for a bounce back as well after, kind of getting screwed over a little bit by the umpire, by Ramon DeJesus and his terrible, umpiring, but his strike zone was off. But I have a good feeling about this series. If this Mets offense could show us something more than an inning or two of getting 5 or 6 runs,
but that's been them all year. That's kind of they're weird. I guess they have to address it in the offseason. Not I guess they have to address it in the offseason. They're a very runs in bunches team. Go to sleep. They don't keep pushing you and pushing you and pushing you. Kind of how the Braves used to do that before they got all these injuries, where every inning they were pushing. You're like, all right, enough. It's stress. It's high stress. The Mets aren't that. They'll start to get on a roll, and then they quiet down. So they'll put 6 spot up, and then that's it. That's who they are, and that unfortunately may be a problem in the postseason. But we'll see. Iglesias is a guy who can manufacture some runs. I think Mendoza's started to see that maybe they need to steal some bases. That might be the big difference in the series. Milwaukee gets on, they're going to run wild. And Alvarez has shown the inability to throw anybody out. I don't know if Torrens comes in late, maybe to mitigate that in his close game. That'll be interesting how he uses Torrens with his arm, because Torrens would have thrown somebody out yesterday if the ball wasn't. Acuna, I think, didn't catch the ball and it rolled into center field, but that's part of it. But yeah, I feel good about this series, but I think game 1 is going to be the hard one to win, and that's probably the one you need to win to really feel good about winning the series. And I think that's going to be a hard one tomorrow. Celebrating, sobering up, getting on a plane, going out to Milwaukee, and less than 24 hours, they're back at it. But maybe that's an advantage, and you saw a little bit of that as they faced the Dodgers back in 2015, and then they only had a day off, and then they went to face the Cubs, who had been resting, if you remember, and the Mets just steamrolled the Cubs. So who knows?
You talk about the Mets trying to steal bases here in this series. I think the big thing they have to do is prevent stolen bases from happening. That's been the biggest issue against this team. They ran roughshod over them for the first 2 games, and especially in the first series all the way back at the beginning of the season on opening day weekend. The Mets have to be able to stop them from running. They have a good lineup that likes to run, likes to play small ball. Kind of reminds me of the Royals in 2015 a little bit.
Yeah, so, fair. Not as much offense, though. Not as much.
Not as much. I was thinking, is this a point in time where you make Francisco Alvarez your DH and catch Luis Torrens? Because, as much as I want great center field defense from Harrison Bader, for this series, I kind of prefer Luis Torrens, where I know he's got a good shot at stopping the run game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. Not that Alvarez hits a hell of a lot to warrant a spot in the lineup at all. I wonder how they go with JD Martinez. I mean, I'm looking at Milwaukee. I'm assuming you got Peralta game 1. Who will be game 2? Frankie Montas. He doesn't scare me. They owe him one. I like that matchup, especially if you put that'll be lefties in the lineup. They'll probably put Winker in the lineup because he doesn't pitch well against lefties, Montas. And then a decisive game. Where would they go? Would they go with Tobias Myers? Did they go? They're not going to bring in Colin Ray. He's going to come out of the bullpen. Aaron Savall.
Freddie Peralta ready.
Freddie Peralta starts game 1. I don't. It's 3 straight games. So I really, if the Mets could get to a decisive game, this is a better matchup than San Diego.
Yes,
but
I agree.
You can't really go by that because you just don't know. And I would say this, the stolen base and the ability to put pressure on the Mets, especially late where Diaz can't hold on. He can't hold you and I on, and I certainly not a burner. I could steal off of Diaz. And I'm slow, Anthony. I'm slow. So that's kind of like Anthony's laughing at this point. So,
look.
We're going to do these spaces then after the game. You're going to be able to handle this?
Oh, of course. I've been doing them. I was doing them once a month for the season, but then August got a little bit crazy and I couldn't do it. But for the postseason, I'm all game. You got to let me know if you're game to do them.
I am game to do the spaces. They don't look like it. So I'm looking at the schedule here. So early game tomorrow, that'll probably be over about 8:30. So that tentatively, a 9:00 space. Let's give the fans something here because I'm sure you all got to start getting your calendars out. And then you got, what is it? Wednesday, the game starts at 7:30. No big deal. That'll be over by 11:00. We'll probably have, I know it's postseason. Now there's no ghost runner, so these games could go long. That's the only thing. And then Thursday, 8:30, that's the one you got to be a big boy and stay up late. Could you handle a midnight space? That's a question.
I've done them in the past.
I know. And then we get a day off and then it's back. But this is go time, man. And then the Knicks start preseason on Sunday. Hockey's around the corner. There's football. This is beautiful, man. I haven't felt this pumped about New York sports in, like I said, maybe 20 years. And I'm talking to general New York, not just Mets or something like that. So I'm up for the spaces. I'll be there. And I always enjoy the commentary from the community. I've had some beautiful notes from the community thanking, and I would say thank you for what we've provided all year. And I think the more that we see the coverage of the team, the demarcation between what is the responsibilities of the mainstream and what their role is to report new information versus bridging the gap, I think never before have I seen such solid content creators. Not a lot of Met content creators, but solid ones that are out there. What Wardy does and you and obviously Joe DeMayo. I mean, he's really part of SNY, but I look at them kind of a tweener. This is hopefully this stays on forever, even when the Mets are not good, because that's what makes this fun is that you're around when the Mets are not good. Doing this in 2017 at the end of the year makes this that much more special if you ask me.
Well, and even better, one of our comments on here from G Money Stacks. Happy International Podcast Day.
Oh, it is a thing. YouTube I didn't get any cards from any of you, so I don't know why.
Virtual cards, everything.
My wife didn't even get me a card, so I have to ask her when she gets home later what's going on. Where's my card? So, but thank you. Anthony's the real star of the two of us. He's been on national TV, not me. So. Or local regional sports network, I should say. not national TV. Let's correct that. Might be too much. He wasn't on Fox. So
before we wrap up here, got a couple more questions and comments from the chat here. John Leary first saying, how ironic is it that we face Stearns' old team in his first year, which I think is a big storyline going into the playoffs. He also added on, is Jesse Winker okay? Didn't play any of these games.
Think he's not hitting. I think they were going matches. By the way, Kelnick matchup with Diaz, that had to be running through people's mind like, oh, please no. And he hit that was a good play by Pete. Yes, Diaz didn't cover, but it wasn't like that was an easy play. Let's not make it out to be that. Darno making the last out, and now Stearns facing his old club. So there's a lot of irony there. That's really interesting.
Johnny Boy had a question for the panel. We'll probably end here with this question. If Pete has a monster postseason, does he secure his Mets future as a Met, or does he just secure his future as a New
It's
York
all
Met?
going to be about money. I think that you have to be real careful about what you pay Pete. Although I will tell you, if Pete leaves and okay, you sign Soto, fine. That does more than enough to address the offense that you lose. It's not that easy to fill first base. Now you could move Vientos there, maybe look at third, whether that be Mauricio. I mean, Jet Williams, I think, is knocking on the door. So this is some interesting things for the offseason with some of the positional players knocking on the door and how expensive a roster could get. And I don't think the Mets want to get back into that negative dead money phase. You have to be real careful about how many years you give him and how big the contract is, because in 3 years, 4 years, Pete could be how Albert Pujols was at the end of his career. And if you guys remember that, he was a nice guy to have off the bench as a pinch hitter. You don't want to be paying that guy $30 million a year to just pop a home run and have a good, or maybe a DH type that's just not a good value at that point. So I think Pete is not a foregone conclusion that he leaves, but even if he went bananas and had a Pablo Sandoval postseason, and if you don't know that reference, look Pablo Sandoval in 2014. He had a big postseason. He was known for those big hits, the Panda. I think that there's a price that you just can't exceed. And who knows? I heard the Nats have money to spend. And you never know. A team might, a second division club might say, I'll spend money on Pete this offseason. He'll hit home runs. He'll bring people to the ballpark. He has a good attitude. He's going to make the lineup better. He's worth it to me, because they're not going to sign anybody else in the context of that. So we'll have to see.
Even if the Mets were to bring back Pete Alonso, he could not be like the prized lineup, possession that they bring in here. Like there has to be something else. He can't do that.
I think they're going to. They have a number of and again, we're putting so much carpet for the horses. Certainly after they get eliminated, but with Jet Williams potentially being a big piece, with Mauricio coming back, everybody's forgotten about him. Beatty's still in the mix. Gilbert's in the mix. He's not that far. The Mets have offensive pieces that are cost controlled, and they have some expensive veterans like Marte, potentially Pete, McNeil, that are still pretty good hitters. I wouldn't just give them away. So I'm not so sure the Mets, if they lose out on Soto, are going to go out and just spend. You may see more of what you saw this offseason. Personally, there's a lot of guys I'd bring back. Not all of them, but a lot. And again, after the season, but I have some ideas about where they could go. I like a lot of guys on this team, and I don't think all of them are going to price themselves out of a reasonable re-signing, because another team says, I want that and I'll overpay for that. You have to say, okay, that's good for you, not for me. And that might be what happens with Pete Alonso. But a big postseason is not going to hurt, because Cohen's the one signing the checks. He might say, look, I like this guy. I want this guy. He was impulsive with Correa. Remember that? In the middle of a dinner, he gets a call and he signs Correa. So you never know. But maybe he's learned. And Stearns, I think, has kind of clamped him down and said, hey, look, you don't need to do that anymore. We'll do that when it matters. We know you got money and the fans know you'll invest. You don't have to do that anymore. And in a lot of ways, they got lucky with Lindor because they jumped on that pretty quickly. They should have played that out. But look, I was wrong. I'm not going to criticize Lindor anymore.
Yeah. With this MVP type season from him, I think you look at a guy like Mark Vientos too, and that kind of calms a little bit down, knowing the fact that, this guy has had a big season this year, quite possibly could be the third baseman next year as well. We'll see what happens there. But I'll say this. If this was any other year with the Mets, under Brody Van Wagen, under now I lost my train of thought here. Who was the general manager before Brody Van Wagen?
Oh, you had
oh my gosh,
you had Minaya and
he was with us through all of the.
You have Sandy Alderson.
Sandy Alderson, yeah, there we go. It's been so long without Sandy Alderson that I forgot about him. But if it was any of like those two guys or some of the people that you mentioned, I don't know if I would have full trust in them taking care of this situation the right way. With David Stearns in position, I feel more
Yeah.
comfortable with him manipulating the roster and knowing which buttons to push, because for the most part this season, what he has done has led this team to the playoffs, and he's been able to
Right.
piece things together the correct way.
Who do you think has the highest OPS plus on the Mets in 2024? Take a guess.
I'm going to go Jose Iglesias.
There you go. Who would have thunk that? When Jose Iglesias was signed, I'm not looking it up. I don't even know if I did anything about it. In a sense where I don't know if I really even paid attention to it. I said, all right, there's a guy that probably if he gets called up, you have some serious injury problems.
Well, now I had the total opposite, and everyone in the chat would know this. When they signed Jose Iglesias, I was like, man, they only got this guy on a minor league deal. He's not going to be their utility guy or, get playing time here. You look at his stats throughout his entire career, even in the minors, he played very well. Very, very well. And I thought that he had to have come up with this team over guys like Zach Short and Joey Wendell. And I was even shocked that they signed Joey Wendell after bringing in Jose Iglesias.
So here's what I wrote. I'm going to write you what I wrote about Iglesias. I wrote on December 10th, Trash or Treasure. I go doing those off season. I wrote a bunch of Kyle Crick was in there, Weston Adams, Cole Sol. So I just a bunch of them. I wrote, let's see how dopey I was back on this. This is an interesting move. Iglesias is a contact hitter who can play elite defense at shortstop. That's actually not true anymore. He's lost a step. That's why he got sent down. This kind of player can be your shortstop when you have an offensive lineup around him. See his time in Detroit. With Francisco Lindor playing every day and Joey Wendell as the super sub, would he be necessary? Veterans like Iglesias have value by overpaying them to spend time at AAA waiting for an injury. He didn't seem to care for that role last year, opting out of a deal with Miami and San Diego. Does Stearns envision him as another versatile around the infield super sub? Does his elite glove translate to second and third? We know the answer there. Perhaps they use both Wendell and Iglesias for late inning defense. Outside of Wendell, the Mets currently do not have any backup middle infielder that profile well on the defensive side. He might have more of a shot to make the club than we think. So it wasn't that bad of an analysis.
No. And now
I thought about him as a Adonis Echeverria. Remember Adonis Echeverria came up?
Yeah.
And then he went over to Atlanta and he terrorized the Mets. I thought of him when I was writing.
And look at him now. Now he
is a good defensive player, not a good defensive shortstop. I think his range is a little off there. I think that's definitely why. I think it was his footwork or something along those lines. So.
Well, he's a big reason why we're in the postseason this year.
Absolutely.
A lot of great stuff coming out from Jose Iglesias, obviously Francisco Lindor, Edwin Diaz today, Brandon Nimmo. If we could get Pete Alonso going during this playoff run here, that'll be a big, big, big positive. But Mike, let everyone know what you're working on. I know you got a podcast coming out tonight as well.
So, yeah, I'm going to be hopping off on this. And if you listen to this, there'll be a lot of repetition on my podcast. Sorry, guys. I spilt the beans. I gave Anthony all the beans before it is. I sound like Mocha Joe now. That's a reference some people may get, some people may not get, but I think you got Mocha Joe on that reference there. Yeah, dude, look, he smiles. But go to the Substack, substack.com/AskTalkinMetsNoG, TalkinMetsPodcast.com. I will be doing the spaces with Anthony after the game. And then the morning after, I'll have a short podcast reaction, marinate on it for the postseason. We'll see how many of these we do. And then when it's over, and that's the thing, it's going to be like that. That's how this goes now. Like that. You're in, you're out, you're euphoric and you're depressed. But I'm going to say there's a little bit of house money here after today. But you know what? Get up 1-0 after game one. And Anthony, you and I know that that's going to change right away at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You could follow Mike at Talking Mets No G on X and get subscribed to his Substack, subscribe to his podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. You can follow me on Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. Follow me personally on X at Ant Rivera 86 and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. Apologies that it did not work out on X. I did not know this specific rule that you
I
could not
promoted
change
it.
certain
I
things.
promoted it. I think you got a good number of people from
We'll,
X.
we'll,
Not
we'll
as
be
much.
back. We'll be back. I'll get that whole
Go
thing
get
situated.
yourself verified for crying out loud. I mean,
Hey, I
Elon Musk,
paid for it, right?
I know you're only paying for it. Elon Musk's running around trying to get himself into the federal government. just do it. Make him verified, man. He paid for it, Elon. Come on. Don't worry about being the, efficiency guy right yet. You got some time for that. It's not even November 5th yet. Come on.
Thanks to everyone in
Get
the
ourselves
chat.
in trouble.
Thank you so much, Mike,
Get
for being
banned
on
from
the show.
X. I'm gone. There you go. Just like what's his face on Saturday night. Goodbye, Mike. You're gone. Elon Musk just threw you out.
I always appreciate you, man, for coming on
All
the
right.
show. A lot of fun. I'll let you go do your show. I'm going to wrap it up here and say that I will be back. Next time will probably be the post of this, and hopefully it's looking towards the division series. And we'll probably recap this wild card series, and hopefully preview the division series.
This time tomorrow we'll be on the space. Either we'll be euphoric, or we'll be like freaking out about being one game away from elimination. So had a ton of fun tonight. Rest well, and we'll see each other. We'll hear each other tomorrow.
Yep. Let's go Mets. And you got to believe. You got to believe.